Hi,
Hello, sir. What is your name?
my name is Quentin Smith.
Okay, and I heard you had a testimony.
I do. I learned the truth about the Sabbath, and I wanted to share exactly what I learned. I was here one day, and it was a typical day. It started out just like any other day, and I was leaving. I was on my way out, and in my community, it's a one-way in and one-way out. And as I was going out, there was a young man standing at a van, and as I pulled closer to him, he turned to me and he handed me a flyer asking me if I wanted to attend a seminar. And I told him I did, and he was rather shocked by it. And he said, "Really?" And I said, "Yes." And so he stuck it into the window to me. And as I continued on, later on, I happened to look at the flyer. Well, the young man that handed me the flyer his picture was on the flyer as a speaker. He and another young man. And I was interested because they both looked to be about 18 or 19 years old. And so to be doing a seminar on revelations or anything of that nature, I was curious how these two young people could be knowledgeable about revelations. And so I did go to the revival, and I was impressed by the teaching. And one of there was two questions that I was asked during this revival, and that was, what day is the Sabbath, and who changed it? And I knew I had 50% of the answer, but what I did not know was the who changed it portion. And to understand why that was so important to me, I grew up in the Baptist church, and I have been taught all my life that Sunday was the day that we worship. And I continued doing that. I've been doing that all up until this time. In fact, I was a minister, an ordained minister in the Baptist church. And so when I heard that and he told me who changed the worship from the Sabbath to first day, I was convinced that I didn't need to continue doing that. And so I went to my pastor and I told him I could not continue worshiping on the first day. And my pastor said to me that he agreed, and we left it like that. So the following weekend on Sabbath, I went to the Seventh-day Adventist church, and I got a call early Sunday morning, and it was my pastor, and he asked me, he says, "Well, where were you?" I said, I asked him, "Well, what do you mean? I told you I couldn't continue to worship on the first day once I had come across the knowledge of Sabbath worship." And so he said, "Well, he had service." And I said, "Okay, what do you mean you had service?" He said, "Well, we had service yesterday on Sabbath." And I said, "You did?" I said, "Well, you didn't tell me that. You just said you agreed that you shouldn't continue worshiping on the first day." And so anyway, I decided at that point that I was going to go back to the church and continue worshiping with them. And I tried to convince my pastor to go with me to the Adventist church and to learn more about what we were talking about, the true Sabbath worship. And so he kept refusing. He wouldn't go with me. And so he had asked me to do the preaching and the teaching about the Sabbath at the church. And so I was doing that, and I was and what I did was I went and I read Matthew 5:17, and I explained that just briefly to him. I went back to Genesis, and I also went to Exodus, and we talked a little bit about the Sabbath. And so after that, we opened it up for questions, and people were asking the question, well, what do I do on Saturday versus what I do on Sunday? And me not really having a lot of information at that point, I just said, well, whatever you did on Sunday, you now would do it on Saturday. And whatever you did on Saturday, put that on Sunday. And everybody was pretty receptive of that. And so we went on. And as I kept going back to the Adventist church and learning more, I would bring it to the new church, and I was teaching them. And I did that for about 6 months. And after a while, I learned about the wilderness experience, and I heard a teaching about the children of Israel wandering in the wilderness for the 40 years, and how God was training them to observe the Sabbath worship. And I taught that to the group. And after about 6 months, I just told them, I said, well, I can't keep doing this because I'm not feeding myself. I'm not able to grow if I'm just trying to grow and go back and learn a little bit and then come back and teach you guys. I need to grow, and I need to continue my growth. And so after January of that same year, and that was January of 2013, I was baptized in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I have been an Adventist ever since. And I love the fact that in the Adventist Church I get an opportunity to learn something new. It appears every day. Every time I hear a message preached or a teaching from different people, even hearing people's testimonies, there's power in the truth of the scriptures, and it changes and it transforms lives completely if people would just be willing to accept it. I also have friends that were ordained ministers and pastors in the First Day Church, and I even attempted to convince them, but I kept getting responses like, I asked them the same two questions. I said, what day is the Sabbath and who changed it? And they responded immediately, man changed it. And because man changed it, they were continuing to do it, and I couldn't understand that. How could you continue to do something that you acknowledge that a man changed and not want to follow after what God says? And so I was more so convinced that I was doing the right thing, and that the Sabbath worship is definitely the truth of the scriptures, and it's continued up throughout the scriptures.
So your friends were ministers. Does that mean that you're a minister as well? You're a preacher?
Yes, in the First Day Church, I am an ordained minister, and I did pastor. I pastored a Southern Baptist church in Florida for about 2.5 years, and then since I retired out of the military, I came back here, and I never pastored a church, but I was in the process of trying to become a pastor.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Share it. It's fire.